All right, good morning everyone and welcome to another of the Teaching Academy's professional development series. This morning's session is a little bit unusual. It is a new idea essentially where we wanted to introduce a session that really focused more on the lived experiences of our educators, our teaching staff, so obviously the lifeblood of what happens here at the university, students and teachers, teachers and students, learning and teaching, all that stuff. And so we really came up with this idea that why don't we just provide a space initially for people to be sharing some of those experiences. And I'm going to provide a little bit more detail around um, what that looks like initially, with the caveat being that we fully expect this to go off the rails a little bit and change and iterate over time. It's meant to be um, a fairly kind of organic idea, and we'll just see where the appetite lies, so to speak. Um, I'm going to provide a little bit of background around Tales from the Kerbside, but I would be remiss if I didn't introduce the other speakers, presenters today. Hopefully I will be doing far less of the talking than normal. I'm sure all of you will look forward to that. But I'm joined this morning by Trudy Fenwick, Educational Designer from the Division of Learning and Teaching. Trudy's also been helpful in, well, we won't say blackmail, let's say negotiating to get other speakers here to share their experiences this morning, and I'm very grateful for that. And we have a number of your colleagues here as well. We have Joe Fitzgibbon, we've got Joe Grimmond, we've got Annette Trace, and we're going to be joined by several others as well. And as each of the speakers, I guess, begins sharing their experiences in this space, I'd also, I guess, encourage them to also tell everybody which school they're from, etc., so you can get a little bit more information on how they're coming into this picture. Whilst I haven't prepared a slide deck as such, what I do have in place, you know I can't live without a Padlet wall, is a Padlet wall. And so I'm going to just give you a little bit of background before our speakers begin sharing their experiences about this, I guess the angle on where this sort of reflection is starting, and then we'll see where it goes from there. So let me just break that down briefly. All right, so the session was called Tales from the Kerbside, and with the idea being, maybe not that the car had broken down, but I was struggling for an analogy, and that's what you get at 10 o'clock. But essentially, an opportunity for us to reflect on change in practice. So essentially something that was introduced where a change, maybe was required, or that you decided you want to do it. So don't get too carried away with the broken down car part. Maybe some of the speakers have that story for you, but I'm not leading them down that path, so to speak. A few focus questions that I've put to the presenters potentially if they weren't sure how they wanted to kind of organise their thoughts. Again, it's not arbitrary, but it was a starting point for some of them. Obvious ones: what was the nature of the change? Why did you do it? Who did it impact? Was it something that you did by yourself, or potentially did it involve bringing in others to be a part of that change? What happened or is still going on? Potentially a little bit of retrospective. Would you consider that change was, broadly speaking, successful or not? And out with the crystal ball. If you were doing it again, if you are doing it again, what would you change? So those are very loosely some prompts for people if they were looking to how to organise their ideas. I've asked each of the presenters potentially to speak for somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes, talking about, the change they've implemented. But again, there aren't a lot of rules around this space, except for the fact that we give people the time that they need to share their experiences. I'd encourage you to put things into the chat as we go. We will be stopping at the end of each presenter for a space for some questions and other things for people to voice some of those. And apart from that, we'll see how it goes. I think that's probably about as many parameters as I want to put around things. So I'll stop sharing that. And I guess I'm willing to throw this open and see who would like to go first. We do love a volunteer in education circles. So Annette has got the
Oh,
hand up. Brilliant. First in.
hello. Yeah, I don't mind putting my hand up. And I'm really looking forward to this session to see what I can learn from it as well. So I work in the School of Nursing, Paramedicine and Health Sciences. I am registered as a paramedic and a pharmacist. And so my specialty is teaching pharmacology. And in the past, it has been quite directed at just paramedics on my side of the teaching, and I would teach an undergrad subject and also a postgrad subject for nurses who want to become paramedics. And part of my assessments for that was doing an oral viva. Now, of course, we have some students that we could do that face-to-face on campus, and others we would do via a Zoom meeting, our distance students and all of the grad cert students. And that actually worked quite well. They would have been given a set of questions that they knew they were going to be asked, and a set of maybe 8 to 10 scenarios that they would have to talk about as they were treating a patient, and give me a pharmacological breakdown and include really important things about that, like mechanism of action and dosing and that sort of stuff. And so that has actually worked really well over the years, and I love it as an assessment, and I definitely recommend it for anybody who has a small cohort. But this year, we combined our nursing pharmacology and our paramedicine pharmacology into one combined group. And so last session I had 400 students, and this session I have 900 students. And there was no way we were going to be able to facilitate face-to-face interviews. That's just too many students to try and logistically organise with markers. So we decided to run with something that had happened, I think, before within the school, but with some difficulties, where we would set up some questions and some scenarios, and the students would be allocated those, and then they would record themselves on Panopto, and then the markers go off and mark it in their own time, which makes it a lot more easy for the students and for the markers. And so I reached out actually to Trudy and to Lachlan, and they helped extensively make this happen. And last session, it did go pretty well. As I said, we had nearly 400 students. And what we decided to do was have 3 possible scenarios, and they could choose which one they wanted to do. Then there was a possibility of 6 different sets of questions, and they didn't know which set of questions they were going to get asked. That didn't come through until they logged on to a quiz. And so once they logged onto the quiz, which was directed to one of the 3 scenarios by Trudy set up 3 different groups, they would sign into that group, and then they could get into that particular quiz. And then with the quiz's ability to do random questioning, they got a block of 2 questions. They had like 5 minutes to review that. Then they had to go into Panopto and start recording their response. And they had up to 15 minutes to record that response. And then they had about another 5 minutes to copy and paste the Panopto link back into the quiz and sign off. And on the whole, it went quite well. We had some students who didn't read the instructions, didn't do the practice that was given. Everybody was given the chance to practice as many times to go through the process. Trudy made extensive videos and written information for them to make it really easy. But some of them thought that, well, for instance, they had to wait until Panopto had finished loading, and therefore they ran out of quiz time and it timed out. So then they had to send me the link, and then I had to try and post it in, and that caused a little bit of extra admin work. Some of the students didn't have their sound on properly, so they had to re-record. For some unknown reason, quite a few of the recordings didn't go to our HSC 204 Panopto folder for assessment 2 oral assessment. It went to a completely different nursing subject. And so then to mark it, you had to request access, which meant for markers who were, say, doing it in the evening or not during working hours, they then had to wait till the next day before that access was granted. So that was a little bit of a problem. But these are things that we feel that we can absolutely fix. And we are running it again this session, and Trudy's going to help me iron out some of those little problems. I think we actually had one student that when they were recording their Panopto, they actually recorded their screen, and we could see that they were scrolling through ChatGPT. So, of course, I had to put in a student academic misconduct on that student. and then I was talking with the academic integrity team, and they said this is a great assessment, but in the end, they only have to look up one topic. Yes, very sprung. They only had to research one topic because they chose that and they knew that was it. And unfortunately, my other assessment, which was worth 60%, was all multiple choice or short answer that they could absolutely use AI on and totally cheat. We had people finishing a 50-minute exam in 9 minutes. So we've got suddenly this pharmacology subject for nurses and paramedics. Very, very important for them to actually understand pharmacology before they go out and treat. But it didn't happen for this one. So we'll be changing it next year. But it just meant that really they only had to learn one topic for the whole session. So I would suggest, if anybody was doing this in the future, to have, and I'll be doing it next year, probably 8 to 10, like I did with my Oral Viva, case scenarios. They have to prepare for each one. They have to learn each one, and then they'll get some questions. And that will be the randomness rather than them picking a scenario. So that's probably it in a nutshell, unless Trudy. Oh, no, actually, the other thing about the SAM, when I talked to the integrity team about that student scrolling through, we did consider then that we could actually encourage or instruct the students that they have to record their screen, not just like what we're seeing now, our faces. But you know how you can, when you're recording Panopto, record different screens. We could include that as well to help reduce that use of AI. Any questions? Any more comments, Trudy or Lachlan? I could not have done it without them. Not a chance. Yeah, go ahead, Veronica.
Thank you. That sounds great, and I'm really interested in the way that it was set up to get the groups and the different scenarios for the students. So I might follow up with you afterwards, or Trudy. But I'm wondering whether you considered using the recording option within the quiz for the students to record directly in there rather than going out to Panopto. And if you decided not to use that, what was the reason for that?
That's a great question. And I think the feedback I'd had from nursing is that anything more than a few hundred students, it just didn't work. Is that right, Lachlan?
Yeah, look, and there have been multiple attempts to kind of engage with it. The problem is to do with the timing and the numbers. So it's when you've got hundreds of students potentially trying to use the same function within Brightspace at the same time, it essentially is going to create a backlog. So if they're all trying to access the video record or the audio record function of Brightspace in the same kind of block of time, it means processing will either take longer or can pause or may even crash and things. And they had some experiences like that early on in some nursing subjects where they were trying to do that. So looking at offloading that, putting it into a tool like Panopto, for example, which has a much better threshold for numbers and scale, is a part of it. And it's interesting because we keep circling back to that in other subjects as well about using internal tools which are more seamless in a sense. The button's right there. So you go, obviously, click on it there, add your response. It's already attached to the question. You can mark it in situ. Like there's a lot of nice kind of potential there for using those integrated tools until the part where the academic says, oh, and there's 900 students, or at which point you backpedal a bit and go, oh, how are we going to do it? Some alternatives that people have looked at is by splitting the timing and getting the students to actually choose different points at which they're going to do the task. So they potentially enroll in groups at different times to do their recording. So you're lowering that kind of that scale or that bulk. That's had mixed success. And the problem is that on the technical side, you might say, oh, well, 2% had a problem and that's an acceptable number, except for the 2%. And, they're still lodging complaints and appeals. And then you've got, the AHOS or someone else hunting you down at home with it, chasing you for about why did this happen? And so, you have to come up with solutions, I guess, that work within that. But yeah, video assessment, I made a comment in the chat before about it, is like for years, people have been looking for avenues to include it more, and that certainly switching the modality up, and some students really engage really well with that kind of task, but at the same time trying to deal with that authenticity question and timing question that we have in this space. And then you actually get someone being captured literally sort of red-handed using AI within that activity being captured. It does surprise me some days that we're still persevering in that space, because it's I think we're probably just going to find that there'll be new avenues or ways to cheat and abuse those systems. Sometimes we're just still playing catch up. Any other questions or comments on Annette's story in that space?
The only
Trudy, yep.
thing, Annette and I spoke recently about how we can try and get it ready for 900 students this time. And I was really interested in the feedback that you got, Annette, going through the academic integrity. We're talking so much about supervised assessment, but their view that this was actually a good way to do that supervised component in a pre-recorded type of fashion as well. Whether you could talk a little bit about what their feedback was in terms of that, because it is, as Lachlan said, it's an interesting space doing video and having students record, and it's not really a secure assessment in that format, but it does still, in terms of academic integrity, meet a little bit of that supervised component. So interesting bit of feedback that you got, Annette.
Yeah, I guess we didn't go into a lot of detail there, but they said that they hadn't really seen many assessments like this, because I guess generally they wouldn't come up for a misconduct, right? Because as I said, it's often been face-to-face or recorded, and but they did think that it was a great way of having that alternative to a supervised, because you can obviously see what the student is doing, and in the rubric they got less marks if they were just reading something that they'd written. They were supposed to talk to you as though you were right there, and show that they can really understand their pharmacology, how it works with, say, physiology and with this particular patient or whatever. And so, yes, not supervised, but you could really catch from the way that they presented their level of knowledge and understanding to a fairly good degree. And I certainly loved their idea of making sure that we make them learn more topics for the future. Yeah, Nikki.
I'm just thinking about that. Were there any marks attached to the presentation? Because we've done our live responses and there was no presentation marks at all. But I can see how, yes, you don't want them just reading. They need to understand it.
Yeah, so we didn't want any slides, and I never asked for PowerPoint slides or anything, but some students wrote to me and said, I don't know where to load my slides. So they obviously wasted time on making even a presentation, because it wasn't a presentation, because they didn't know which questions they were going to get. They didn't have to go to that much detail. But yes, it was definitely, but it was only like 10% out of the 100 was on the way that they delivered it to show that they had the understanding.
And in the
Sheree.
rubric, it was more about the delivery was logical, cohesive, well structured. So not so much in their ability to present brilliantly, but just that they had that knowledge underpinning it.
Yep, great.
Just following on from those two comments, just something I've observed in rubrics when marking either viva voces or delivery of material, that once the rubrics don't seem to reflect once you start drilling down on students with specific questions. They're very not adept at answering them, which really shows that they've really just skimmed across the topic. So my call out would be to make sure rubrics, now that we're using more and more supervised assessment, make sure the rubrics have a significant component where you can mark students down on their inability to be able to respond at a deep level, at a postgraduate level I'm teaching. So, but yeah, just something I've noticed. I've marked in a number of subjects where there hasn't been a specific item on that. And so students might do a nice presentation, they speak clearly, they engage with the camera, but once you start drilling down, there's nothing where you can really mark them down and demonstrate that they really didn't fulfill the requirements of the assessment. So, that's a big focus of mine, making sure that there's a rubric item and it's sufficiently weighted.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the way that you write the questions as well makes a big difference, because I had some students using nearly their full 15 minutes, and I had some that recorded in like 3.5. So I actually went back and rewrote the questions for this session, because I didn't have time to change CDAP. Right, I couldn't change things massively, but I changed the questions so that I've got more dot points that leads to things within the rubric, so they can sort of see how they can manage to get an HD better, and I think that's been a good learning tool from last session.
All right, I'm going to jump in there because
Yes.
timing is getting away from us. But firstly, thank you so much, Annette, for sharing. You've already got my brain whirling again around ways that we can game the game, so to speak, and randomize and split things even further to try and capture this. But it's interesting that this whole scenario really is, well, it's synchronous to an extent that the student has to perform on the spot within a time limit. So there's a step away essentially from the idea that you've got a bunch of time in advance to pre-prepare the thing, but it's also not the same as a live in person. So we're in an interesting middle ground, and I think there's probably a lot of potential there for experimentation moving forwards. But anyway, I won't dwell on that now. I'm going to take this opportunity now to hand over to Jo Fitzgibbon to be our next storyteller for today. Thank you, Jo.
Hi everyone, I'm from the School of Education. I have been a full-time sessional for about 15 years here at Charles Sturt, but became permanent last year. Was it about October, November that there were some rumblings about supervised assessments? And I got super keen. And I thought, how hard can it be? So I contacted a marvellous ED. I call her my ED, but I think I must be sharing Trudy with a whole range of people. But I said, how about we create supervised assessments in 3 of my subjects? Like, really, how hard could it be? So that's what we did. And it's been a ride, let me tell you. But, working with Trudy, I have learnt so much. The professional learning that I have gained has been incredible. We created these authentic assessments across 3 of my subjects: scaffolded tasks, clear instructions, authentic, flexible, interactive oral assessments. I'm so proud of them. And 2 of the subjects, I rolled the assessments out last session, and 1 of the subjects this session. But it got me thinking, and this is the beware moment. It got me thinking. I had to then reflect on my subjects. It made me think in terms of not the learning content, but in terms of the layout, the signposting, the multimodality, the accessibility, thinking about the diverse needs of my cohort, because I teach in a Masters of Inclusive Ed. I mean, if any subjects have to be inclusive, it has to be my subjects. And we had done such a marvelous job in those authentic assessments. I had to go back and with a fine-tooth comb, go through my subject. And that's what I did. And that's why I looked so haggard by the end of last session, but that's another story. Why did I do that? One, because of the detail that we went into creating these fabulous assessments, but because there was also in, the PD that I was doing, people were saying about some of the angst that students were bringing to this space of supervised assessment, interactive orals in my case. And I didn't want them to bring that. It's always been my heart that my students engage, they feel welcomed, they feel supported. And so I didn't want them to get to this assessment that I was so proud of and excited to deliver, and they be a total mess. And so that also made me go through literally page by page of my Brightspace site to check my tone. There was no point me being friendly and welcoming when they turned up for the interactive oral. My welcoming and friendliness needed to start on day 1. And whilst, it was a friendly subject, that I'd try to be a friendly person, I really had to be quite specific. I needed to check, was it evident in every single page of the learning content that I was considering backward design, UDL principles, inclusive practices? How was I signposting the learning? How was I guiding students, a bit like a gradual release, to know that when we got to the assessment time, that they were going to be face to face with me, that they had been welcomed and scaffolded throughout the whole subject. So that was where I sat last session. You can see that I took Lachlan's guidelines for what I'm presenting today quite loosely. But what I want to share with you is what I created, and I am going to share my screen. Do I have rights to do that? Surely I do. Here we go. Can you all see that I created an in-subject survey? So I could have done this. I could have gone into subject admin, and there's some way to do a poll and survey, and I could have taught myself how to do that. But I decided, since I had my own subscription to Cognito Forms, I created this in Cognito form, took me possibly half an hour, and just embedded it right there into the subject. And because I had taken such care to go through the entire subject, I wanted to get some feedback. And I could have got that in the subject experience surveys, but I don't get a lot of take up, although I did spruik them a little bit more last session. So I did get a few more subject experience surveys completed, but there were specific things I wanted to ask because of what I had specifically honed in on in going through the subject. So this was the in-subject survey that I created. and looking at right at that getting started, did you feel welcomed? I did this forum post, how can I assist your successful engagement? Students were shocked that I would even ask them. Students really responded to that. They loved that and said, well, first of all, Jo, thanks for asking. And then they gave me a long list of things to consider as an inclusive educator about my students and about the cohort. Now, I looked at learning and I looked at assessments, overall experience. Okay, so after I did that, I created some pie charts in NVivo just to sort of have a little bit look at the data. But because I am also presenting this elsewhere, what I did do was printed them up using AI, just so that, and I think I got a good response rate. 27 responses out of 52, I think is a great response rate to have achieved, for the first round. But got just some really interesting data, first to celebrate, and then to also reflect upon. It was confirmatory that the effort I had made to go through the subject, signpost, learning, provide modality to ensure that students could engage with learning content in ways other than just having to read a whole lot of material. Absolutely. There are journal articles that our students need to engage with deeply, but there are other ways, as we know as educators, that students can engage with the learning content and be really successful. So this was my way of supporting their success and gradually releasing them to independence at the point of assessment. Lachlan, are you saying my 5 minutes is up already?
No. I would never hold a stopwatch to you, Jo, I promise.
Thank you.
I'm interested in some of the responses there, particularly the ideas for improvement bit that was in there. Now, did you frame those ideas up and they voted on them, or
No.
were those responses from them that you or your AI friend collated, for example?
Yeah, so my AI friend did not change any of this wording. These are, all they've done, all my AI friend did was printed this up, okay? This was from the subject survey from here, those responses in here.
Yep.
Do you have any suggestions, blah, blah, blah. So literally, this is what the students have given me, which is going to be really useful. I'm going to use this in two ways. I'm thinking about it. Firstly, obviously, I'm going to use it to provide improvements even more so for the next offering for 513. There were some things that I agree with and there were that needed improvement that I hadn't got to. Other things I thought I had improved really well, but still, the students felt that they had some suggestions. But yeah, these are word for word from the students. The other way I'm thinking of using this, because, I teach in Master of Inclusive Ed, my cohort are mostly teachers, educators themselves. I'm actually going to share some of this feedback from the 2630 to my 2730 cohort. I'm just going to pull out some pieces and actually show them how I have used that feedback. I've been reflective, I've been reflexive, and what I have changed in the 2730 offering. So I think that, I will be choosy what I share, but I think it will be a good model, one for our students to see that we do use the feedback. It is worthwhile to give feedback, as educators, academics, we use the feedback to enhance our subjects, but also to model to them as teachers how to use the feedback. So that is, yes, Lachlan.
Me again. I'm going to go devil's advocate here for a minute.
Yep.
At what point do you get someone further up the chain saying to you, why didn't you incorporate this into the SUES, for example, as that's our official mechanism for capturing student feedback and
Yeah.
data, etc.?
Yeah, that's right. And you know what? I probably would, that would be my ignorance in terms of how tailored can I make the experience surveys, right? How tailored are they? Having said that, I think it's important as educators that we're not just using one piece of data. So it's important to triangulate our data, and that's what I'm going to be doing, is using multiple pieces of data to reflect on what changes need to be made for the 2730 offering. So I did, as I said, spruik the experience surveys. I've got these surveys and I've got students' emails to me. And so those three pieces of data is actually what I'm going to be using. And so that's what I would say, that, you know, but again, yes, I could have, you know, when they ask if, you know, if we want to make our surveys a little bit more specific for our subjects, but I wanted to drill down a little bit deeper, and I didn't think they'd let me change the whole survey, right? You know, and so I did. I wanted to ask some more questions. I know what I had worked on, so I did want to drill down that little bit more. But yes, I agree with you. I could probably next time think about what questions I could include in the experience survey.
So I'll just to clarify, that's not me spruiking the SUES either, by the way. I guess what I'm channeling is preparation for that question when it comes.
Yeah.
I'd probably throw into the mix the timing around it is also atrocious. With my student hat on, I've already checked out at that point.
Oh, for sure.
And it generally means that the people that actually take the time to engage with that have either got an axe to grind, often informed by the results that they've received, or they were always going to engage because they're, you know, I'm not going to say that, you know, they're overachievers or anything, but I'm just saying that you're going to get types that definitely will engage with that because they're the type that will provide that feedback. So the timing issue, the issue that you described in terms of being able to drill down to particular aspects of your delivery and incorporate those easily into a data collection tool. It's not easy to do that in the SUES. You've got the ability to maybe carve out an additional one, maybe two questions that you can add to it if you work through the process. But the fact that you've managed to actually broaden that out into something and get the students to respond in the numbers that you did probably already tells you which avenue works potentially at that point. But anyway, I won't harp on that. Have we got any other questions or comments from other audience members about Joe's changes at this point? No?
I'm ready to hand over. Thanks, everyone. Oh, Nikki, sorry.
Nikki and Cherie. Yep.
Oh.
Did you find many completed the end of subject survey as well? Or I feel like some students would choose one or the other.
Look, because it was all anonymous, you never really know. There was only one experience survey that had a similar comment, and I thought, oh, okay, they've done both. And I was also thinking that as well. Have I actually messed up the experience survey because they've gone, well, I've done this, I've done that. And I guess, you know, as Lachlan was saying, for years, I have not got any numbers, you know, I've probably got 6 out of 40 students, 50 students who respond, you know, and
it's the really unhappy or the really happy ones.
Yeah, it is. Exactly. Right. Whereas I feel like I've got a good spread here. And, you know, I didn't want to share my screen for too long, but, you know, I got a good spread. And I think also because I created that welcoming atmosphere and that collegial atmosphere that, you know, we're all actually educators here, students actually took the time to give me some really useful, effective feedback, you know, which is awesome. Cherie.
I know, just a couple of comments and then another devil's advocate. So I totally agree. End of semester end of session is not a good time because students are exhausted and they're wrapping up their learning. And I've incorporated a similar thing, a sort of a pulse check. But I just wanted to just check as a newbie to Charles Sturt around confidentiality of student information. So, and going outside of the standard tools, which we understand are protected within Charles Sturt, whether the tool that you used, how did it make sure that that data wasn't collected and maintained securely?
Yes, so I first of all I tried to use our Copilot, but Copilot really wasn't giving me what I wanted. So I went further, but I ensured that I did not put anything to do with the title of the subject, the university. I didn't have any of the students' names, so there was no. I made sure it was all de-identified.
Yeah, and it was a survey tool I was more interested in.
Oh, yeah. The survey tool. The same thing. I added after I had created it, I then added in the Charles Sturt and the subject code and things like that. Yes. Yeah, good point. Thank you. I forgot to say that.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Jo Fitzgibbon, for sharing your experiences around that tool. I think if anyone else has any other questions, etc., comments, please feel free to put them into the chat as we go. And our final speaker for today, sharing her experiences, is the wonderful Jo Grimmond. So, Jo, I'm going to hand the mic over to you.
This is a really nice lead in from Jo's, actually. As you'll see in a minute. Hi everyone, I'm Jo Grimmond. I'm a proud Darug woman. My beautiful painting behind me is a tribute to my story living and working on Yuin country. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. So just a little bit of background of me. I started in my position in December 2024, and my background, I came from a university where I taught mostly face-to-face students. So it was a big change for me to come into this online teaching space. I teach in the Birth to Five program, and it's all online teaching. So I'm really, really passionate about setting students up for success and for encouraging rich engagement and coming to class. So I really had to think about how I was going to really sustain that and do that really effectively and authentically. Both of the subjects that I teach are usually in the first two subjects that they do. So we're talking about between 150 to 200 students in each of those subjects. So I thought about how I could really in online classes get them to engage and actually come to class. And I also thought about how, and I know that everybody will agree with me, how really reflecting on how deflating it is to just teach to names on the screen. So how I was going to get them to actually turn some webcams on and get them to engage with me and to sustain that engagement over time. So I really thought about how I could use some tools within the class, within the online sessions with the big groups, because I now have been able to sustain between about 70 to 95 students every week in class, and I now have most of the first screen of Zoom with them turning on their webcams. So I feel really proud of that, how I've been able to do that. And Jo, I really, when you were talking about relationships and building authentic environments for children to feel, for students to feel warm. Most of our students, just to give you a bit of background, are already teaching in early childhood education and care. So they're already coming with in the pathway program, they're coming with a diploma, they're already working in services. So my other passion was to get them to engage in class, think and reflect on the content and actually apply it in practice. So actually translate that straight into practice. So one way that I thought about engaging online with them was to use the annotation, just that simple annotation through Zoom. So I had a go with using that, and I really thought about how I could get the students to use that, and they use the chat function to really sort of engage in the content that we're talking about and really think and reflect on their practice. So I've got them using the annotation tool, and what I do, because it was really important for for me to for them to feel like their contributions matter, and that I'm actually reading the chat and I'm actually really engaging with what they're saying as well. So I take screenshots. I get them to annotate, reflect on the content, annotate on the slides, and then take screenshots of them. It's all, you know, there's no names on the contributions, and they don't have to contribute. They can either use that or the chat function. And then when I add my PowerPoint slides to Brightspace, I always include the screenshots and their annotations within that slide so that they can see that their contributions matter. And it's amazing how they do comment on that as part of feeling like a learning community, feeling really comfortable in a place that they can share. I always get that. So I've been able to sustain that engagement. Last session I had between 70 and 95 students every week with me in my sessions, and I had record numbers completing the survey. The other thing that I do is use Mentimeter. So following on from what you were saying, Joe, about collecting data, because for me, I didn't want to wait for the surveys. I wanted to enact change there and then. I wanted to enact change, give them a voice to actually add to the subject outlines when we don't have to wait till the subject surveys come out. So I use Mentimeter. So that's another thing that I use, Mentimeter, just to collect feedback. And my idea was that to start with was to gather feedback on assessments and how they're feeling about, because one of the subjects, there's a group discussion task that I set up, and Lachlan knows all about this one, that they have to engage online. So we set it up on Brightspace. So I wanted to get some feedback on that. I also wanted to get some feedback on the other subject, because for this session, I've developed a supervised task, and, you know, Joe was talking about not doing things in halves. I thought, okay, I'll use the opportunity to update all of the assessments in the subject at the same time and make sure they scaffold towards a supervised assessment. So gathering that feedback, that student voice, was really, really important to me. So I use Mentimeter, and I download it as a PDF, and I use it, and I show students that their voice really matters. And I talk about, Joe, you talk about showing the students in the next cohort that you've gathered the feedback. I also gather, the other important thing for me with my teaching is gathering, I call them light bulb moments. So really, really key things that really resonate with them, and that they've been able to translate into their practice straight away. So gathering key moments. So I have a slider, just a simple slide every week, light bulb moments that they can share of something that's really resonated to them. The key part to getting them to engage and come to class for me has been no expectation of them to do a certain amount of content before they come. So we always unpack the week before. I talk about assessments, but there's not that pressure for them to, in their busyness of their working lives, because they're all working in services and juggling families, to actually have done all of the content before class. So that, I think, has set them up for success as well. And the other thing that I do is really, really big part of really looking and reflecting on my practice is that collegiality with the marking team. So making sure that and it's all about relational pedagogy, isn't it? As teachers, it's all about developing those relationships and collaboration with your team. So I set up a content tile on Brightspace to introduce them under the welcome folder, to introduce the students to their markers and the marking team. That also gives the markers a sense of belonging as well to the group, and because we all know that marking is teaching, and that it's a really, really important role that they have to set students up for success. So to develop the assessments, I go and I ask for feedback from the marking team as well. So that's really important, so that they feel like they have a voice and they want to come back and work with me again, because it's all about developing that collegiality and those relationships within the marking team as well. So they have contributed to the redesign of the 3 assessment tasks that I'm actually going to have a crack at this session. So we'll see how we go with that. I'm sure there'll be challenges, successes that come along with that. And the last thing that I want to just talk about, if I can, is just leading on from the marking, the collegiality with the marking is we're doing a project, myself with colleagues Daniel Anson and Belinda Downey. Belinda Downey is a bit of a guru around supervised task as well. So I worked with her, collaborated with Kirsten Locke, just to gather some ideas about what the supervised task could potentially look like. But we are also engaged in a project to really determine what helps markers succeed with feedback literacy. So watch this space. That's a project in motion at the moment. We've interviewed a small set of markers and potentially developing resources that could potentially have broader impact within the School of Education and then perhaps more broadly across the university as well. So there's a few things that I've done that I feel really proud of, and it's a continued constant cycle of reflection, isn't it? And that's what gives me joy in my teaching, to try things, and it's not always going to work, but really learning from them. And our core business is setting students up for success, so really making sure that we're inclusive, engaging, and warm, so that when they come to those supervised tasks, like you said, Jo, they're feeling really comfortable that they can talk to you as well. Our cohort is quite diverse. There's a lot of called students. There's quite a diverse range of students with different challenges in their lives, as well as working. So for me, it's really important that I set them up for as much success as possible and get them to come to class. So I've been able to sustain that. So we'll see how we keep going. And I, with my teaching, I follow them two sessions in a row. So I'll be able to see this session whether I've been able to sustain that engagement across two sessions with the same cohort, around about the same cohort of students. So that's me in a nutshell, and a few different things that I'd like to share.
Thank you, Jo. That was excellent. I am going to cut the questions at that point just for a moment, because we also have Andrea Shinianu with us this morning as well, who we've asked to come along and share some of her experiences, and I'd love to give her a few minutes as well to do that. So if you have any other questions, etc., for Jo or any of the others, please put them into the chat, and we'll happily keep going in the back channels as well. So Andrea, over to you.
Thank you, Lachlan. And I have to apologize, that time slot was triple booked. I was going from meeting to meeting. Anyway, basically, I would like to just talk a little bit about the experience we had with delivering a very large a brand new subject to a very large cohort online. And we decided to put in a group task. And this is first year cohort. And the group task, obviously, we know it is quite stressful for these students. And the subject was interprofessional healthcare practice. So we felt that the group task actually was putting their interprofessional practice in action. So what they have learned. So we had a really good justification for why we wanted the group task. And that actually became key when we had a lot of students complain about the group task and any difficulties they encountered with getting hold of members of their group, or having to work with, instead of 5 members, only 4 members ended up having to work on the task. So we continuously went back to the fact that this is what happens in real life. When you are in a team, sometimes some of the team members might not show up. How are you going to manage that in real life? And obviously we supported them, and we gave them lots of strategies on how to work around that. But it was just very interesting to see how students kind of then took that feedback and went, oh yeah, you are right. It does happen in real life. So most of them actually managed to take that feedback on board and then try and work around those difficulties. And we saw that reflected in their own So one of the aspects of the assessment was a sort of a written reflection about what they did in the task and how they grew, I guess, during that process. So we did see a lot of students take those feedback on board and say, look, it was really difficult. That was a challenge for me, but I have really learned that when in a group environment, the patient outcome is the primary consideration. And then if that means I have to do extra work, or I have to step in and do something else, or I have to take leadership, then I need to do that. So it was really exciting to see those insights develop in the students. And I think that's a really big outcome that perhaps it's not part of the official SLO, but it's a really good outcome for a subject such as interprofessional healthcare practice. So yeah, it was mainly coming back to the fact that we are giving you an opportunity to trial out what real life is like through this activity and for you to learn through this. Feedback, I haven't gone through all the feedback yet, but what we found is we had the small group of people who are still very much stuck on the fact that, oh, it's a group assessment. It was really difficult. I hated it. And then we had lots who really found it useful to learn through that process. So I'm actually quite happy now to have group tasks.
Thank you, Andrea. I think it's, I mean, the EDs that are in the room as well, I think will probably have quite diverse experiences in this space as well, because we consistently have, you know, questions raised around, I don't know about the validity, but let's say the appetite to have group assessment as a part of the regime, and it often ends up in that space of students, some feeling disadvantaged by having to do that type of task, exactly for the reasons that you've articulated there, whether it's someone who's particularly confident and doesn't want to be, this is the whole lifters leaners type sort of argument really. And I don't know that there's any proven solutions in that space at the moment, although as you'll see with some of the commentary in the chat from Nikki and others, that a common landing point these days is to provide a choice essentially for those that choose to engage in the group format with others and make that kind of their approach, and still giving people the option to do that sort of individual pursuit where they're more comfortable with it. And in terms of the rhetoric that's also around marketing, in a sense, at the university level, when they talk to students about how they choose to engage with their studies and their learning and having that choice, I suppose that aligns to some extent. But I don't know. It all feels a little untested, unproven, I suppose, at the moment in terms of the best way to approach it. Except there's still a whole bunch of research out there that says that peer assessment, group assessment, tasks, etc., where people collaborate essentially towards those goals, can have really amazing outcomes for those that genuinely engage in that space.
Yeah. And look, we did have issues with, as you said, the leaners and so on. And some people did feel disadvantaged. And that's where I think we have to really reconsider the marking rubric itself. I think there is a way to do a peer or be a group task in a way that's a lot more fair to those that do the work. I think it just needs to be thought out a little bit more deeply, something which we didn't have time to do with this subject just because it was completed and had to be delivered straight away. And I think that's something that Myra and I were going to be thinking and talking about, because I would like to teach the subject again next session. But the reality is that in real life, in work, you often don't have a choice whether to do something by yourself or in a group. And you won't have, we also had a lot of students asking, well, can't I choose who I want to be in a group with? And I said, actually, no, because in work, once again, you don't have a choice. You will be forced to work with people you don't like. How are you going to manage that? You need to learn skills to actually manage all those issues. And I think perhaps for the next time, I will probably put a lot more training in, or maybe some work with the students around this aspect of it, so they have an understanding of why we're doing the group assessment and what the expectations are, and the rationale behind it. And then hopefully that will allow for better engagement, because a lot of students actually did engage towards the end a lot better than they did in the beginning, and the work was done, and they carried their own weight. It was more the timing that was a lot of stress for a lot of people, because they said, well, I want to do this 3 weeks in advance, whereas others like to do it 5 days before the due date. So those are sort of timing issues. If we put the assessment, for example, as the last assessment, everyone knows that deadline is there and you have to kind of work towards it. So I think those are small issues that can be worked out. But from a personal perspective, I like to make assessments as authentic as possible. And this kind of assessment really imitates what real life is like when you go and work in health.
I think I have a feeling that this discussion actually could go on for a significant amount of time, but unfortunately we don't have the luxury of time this morning. So I'm going to actually draw things to a close, firstly by saying a huge thank you to all of our presenters that have agreed to come in and share their experiences this morning. I think it's been fascinating. We've had really good engagement from everybody in the space, with people wanting to know more and probably going to likely to approach you and ask some other questions about some of the ideas, etc., and your experiences, which is wonderful. We are going to be holding more Tales from the Kerbside, probably another one this session towards the end, and then we'll just keep going. So for those of you that have your own ideas and experiences, etc., or those that are to come, we definitely want you to be involved as well. So if you're happy to be involved in those, please reach out to myself or to an ED or others. We'd love to see you, to hear from your experiences as well. So a huge thank you. I am going to stop the recording in just a moment, and we do look forward to seeing you all at the next of the Teaching Academy PD series. Thanks everyone, and have a great rest of the week.
Bye. Thanks.